This is Israeli Technology Founders Speak, a podcast of conversations with successful Israeli high-tech and biotech entrepreneurs. With your host, Avraham Hermon. Tami Ellison is the CEO and founder of Conflu3nce, an Israeli startup that aims to revolutionize early detection and predictive healthcare with image-based technologies that address health disparities and improve outcomes. Their stitch and peel method enhances image analysis by juxtaposing non-contiguous sections, benefiting human cognition and computer vision. Avraham sat down with Tami in the offices of JMB Davis Ben-David to discuss how she came up with the idea for Conflu3nce, how she got funded, the role patents play in her business, tips for startup founders, and much more. This podcast is a creation of JMB Davis Ben-David, an intellectual property law firm serving clients around the world. You have great innovations. We keep them safe. It's not enough to just have a great startup idea or innovation. If you don't legally protect your innovation's products and brand, anyone can claim them as their own. We keep your great innovation secure. Learn more by going to jmbdavis.com. That's jmbdavis.com.
Can you start with telling us a little bit about yourself and about your background as it relates to your startup?
I grew up in Chicago, where I went to school as well. I have a master's in cell molecular and developmental biology with an emphasis on developmental protein expression, patterns basically. And after 9/11, I moved from Chicago to Denver and then subsequently made Aliyah to Israel in 2014 at the end of Tzuk Eitan. I'm an author. I have a book coming out in May of next year. I'm an inventor. I'm a photographer and also a scientist.
So you have managed to combine a lot of these aspects in your startup in Conflu3nce, right?
Absolutely. And the root of it is really based on images. And it started with the photography during my pre-Aliyah trip to Israel. So there's a wonderful confluence, hence the name of the company, in bringing the company to Israel after I made Aliyah as well.
When you came in here, you presented me with a picture, and it looks like a composite of 3 different pictures together.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lines that are essentially separating each section of each picture, and they're interspersed within each other. I don't know if I described it well.
No, you did, 100%. Interwoven is what the patent actually says.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll get to IP. I like talking about IP.
Also interleaved.
Okay.
Yes.
So what problem does this solve? I see that this is the product, but what's the need? What does this do? And what is your company? What is Conflu3nce doing?
So it actually isn't a product. Initially, before I formed the company, while I was still in the United States, I was developing these images as art. And from an interesting perspective is that when you look at these images, as you and Jeremy had done, you can see this dynamic shifting of figure and ground dynamics. That's interesting. And that's interesting not only from the perspective of how we perceive images, but also how we can utilize that property. And so initially, this really became an opportunity to advance neurocognitive science from the perspective of how can we engage cognition, understand it better, improve the quality and quantity of inputs. And the reason why I bring this up is that when you look at these images, you've got embedded within this, these wonderful features for the perfect stimulus. You've got rich content, you've got content that you can personalize, and you've got content that can be gamified. So that looking at neuroscience from a historical background, most of what's done is really from a speed and accuracy perspective, looking at skills. How's your attention? How's your memory? Your visual spatial skills, language, etc. But those are usually analyzed on an individual basis rather than the composite, which is really what these images reflect, both the parts as well as the composite. And so what we have is an opportunity to build a stimulus, an enriched stimulus, a visual stimulus that allows you to directly measure cognition. That's different.
So in terms of cognition, specifically, what sort of diseases or impairments are you considering treating or diagnosing?
So it isn't so much from a diagnostic standpoint. And I'll qualify it in this way. I think most AI systems, most systems and companies are really directed towards diagnostics. That's the ground truth that we have. It's the symptoms that we can see. So the question becomes is how do you begin to roll back that timeline to make it much more effective if you are introducing a remediation, or if you can go ahead and create like a maintenance program in order to maintain your cognitive status or build a cognitive reserve. So in terms of conditions, it's really interesting when you look at what's out there now is that there's a confluence, I love using that term, of many different aspects or cognitive domains across diseases. So on everyday stress levels, you have attention being impacted. You have visual spatial, memory. It runs the gamut. And then if you take a look and advance that, certainly to areas of Alzheimer's disease and dementia and other related dementias, you have a mix of symptoms, early symptoms that can be recognized. Well, the challenge then is to roll back that timeline even further and to identify prior to you becoming symptomatic with what can be recognized. And that's really what the purpose of this is. So looking at these, you're actually asked to decode. So you're asked to remember what pictures are in there. You're asked to identify objects. You're asked, for example, to identify what's in the figure or ground position, or to identify or stabilize this switching mechanism, this phenomenon referred to as percept switching, which occurs with figure and ground images. So you're really looking at the totality, the whole of cognition, as opposed to just its parts. And that's really, I think, what Conflu3nce brings differently to the table in terms of how we approach really the holy grail of rolling back the timeline and to stem the tide of cognitive decline. That really is the goal. And then to be able, in doing that, to remediate earlier along those lines.
I see. Interesting. So potentially if you're diagnosing and then treating a disease earlier, the patients will have
better outcomes,
slower decline or better outcomes then, right?
Exactly. And I'll just add that images are powerful tools. We utilize, in terms of our five senses, we're really operating at about 75, 80, 90% in visual inputs. And so when you look at that, we have the potential really to impact. Now, clearly, for someone who's either hearing impaired or visually impaired, there's different caveats that you can bring to the table on that, and that right. creates issues. So is it a system for everyone? Not necessarily, but it can require some adaptation that allows you to transcend whatever limitations there are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand. Can you explain how the idea was born and how did you become involved in it? I guess you're the main driving force behind this company.
To the second part of your question. The first part really comes from a pre-Aliyah trip in taking images, pictures, when I was here. And I wanted to tell a story. I hadn't been here for many years. I wanted to tell a story. I had been involved in marketing, strategic marketing communications for many, many years and, had developed some graphical skills in the process. And so in trying to tell a story, I put together multiple images. And I tend to be fairly logical. So I didn't just create a collage. Instead, it was called a photage. And that was serially sectioning multiple images and juxtaposing them in a logical fashion. So you're not eliminating any content. You're simply interleaving it and interweaving it with other images. And there's a limit to how many images that you can include in that, but 2 or 3 are really great. And what's wonderful about this is that the image that I had given you, for example, has 30 slices in it. But you can imagine that, that can be a little overwhelming, as well as, that's 10 slices from each image with 3 images. So, but you can scale that. And that's the real beauty of it, is that from a complexity standpoint, you can reduce the complexity to 6 slices or 4 slices or 2 slices so that you can adapt to the individual, whether they're progressing or regressing or declining in their process, but still engaging them within the same system. Mm-hmm. And that's a really important thing. Rather than having a discontinuous clinical scale, you have a continuous one.
Interesting. So you essentially took a hobby of yours, which is photography.
Hobby. No, I was a professional photographer.
Okay.
I became a professional. Yeah, I'll just qualify. I became a professional photographer, partly because of the images that I brought you, these composites, which were very interesting because it's a new kind of visual illusion. But also, I just take really nice pictures. Mm-hmm. And so I had a bunch of shows and sold a bunch of stuff. And I actually had, when I first made Aliyah, I had a tarucha here at the Science Museum.
You had a show here?
I had several, but the main one was actually at the Science Museum. They have a permanent exhibit on visual illusions. And so this was a natural fit for them. And it was really wonderful as a new Ola to come in, literally in the very first few months that I was here, to have, I had 3 taruchot within the first 6 months I was
3
here.
3 shows.
Yep.
So you took a passion of yours, photography or art. At what point did you realize that this has some sort of business or even clinical application?
I think almost immediately, and I do mean that. One of the interesting things about images, and these in particular, is it depends on what images you include. So the phenomenon of this figure and ground dynamic switching that occurs doesn't occur with all image combinations. And so from a neuropsych standpoint, they're referred to as stable or multi-stable image sets. And what makes it all the more interesting along those lines is because you can put different images in combination and have a different outcome and also predict what that outcome is going to be. You can then go ahead and create a system that allows you to engage cognition holistically and individually across multiple domains.
So what made you come to that realization?
Just looking at the images. Mm-hmm. So when you look at them, so when I first put these images together, I would look at them and go, that's interesting. That image is switching on me where I'm seeing a change in the figure and ground. And then in another set of images, it wasn't. And so that actually began a 6-year adventure, probably more suited to academia, but not to be, to understand what image properties convey this figure and ground dynamic. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. What is embedded in those images and in the scenes that we see? How do we perceive figure and ground? Because everything is in a relative state. You sitting in front of me is in the figure position closest to me, and that wall is in the ground position. But the wall outside and the building next door are in the further ground position. And so we're always using figure and ground dynamics. And so from a health standpoint, visual spatial changes occur, memory changes occur, attention changes occur. When you look within the system holistically, you can identify changes both in the individual domains, and that's interesting. Those skills, how do they change? And we see, most recently, obviously, with things that are happening in the news, to see those obvious changes in speed and accuracy in how someone speaks, in the information they convey. But what's more interesting is the process. How does it impact our decision-making and our ability to make those decisions?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, you are taking your photography profession and passion and combining that with your biology background. And
correct.
Together, this can lead to this exciting result of a new potential diagnostic tool.
So a screening tool and diagnostic potentially. But I think it's interesting, and maybe the better frame on it is that science and art have always been brought together through creativity. That's the commonality between them. And I am blessed. I'm very grateful for these things, that I am a generalist and I'm able to do a bunch of different things. And I think in many respects, because I was always into puzzles and patterns, it was a natural fit to go from putting together an image and then analyzing what that image is all about. From an aesthetic standpoint, it's lovely. Not all image combinations are aesthetic, by the way. That's a really fascinating perspective, because when you look at these, you still have to be able to decode it. Your brain is making sense of this, each individual image and the parts of those images. And so when the image combinations are incongruous to what we understand or what we expect. And that's how AI works also. What we expect when we're doing a search. It's that fill-in large language models of what is the next natural in the sequence. And so that's what visual cues are from a Gestalt perspective. It's that we can look at one part and expect or predict what's going to be that next part, or that continuation of that horizon line, or the continuation of how a word is formed. And that's really a powerful tool, both from science and art.
I see. That's fascinating. Let's talk about your investment. Have you obtained investment? And if so, how did you obtain investment in your project?
So I started the company in 2016. By 2017, I was fairly confident in what we were doing in terms of, is there potential products here? Is the science solid? And that was really what the 6 years going into this was really all about. And so in the summer of 2017, I began meeting with an investment group, which was a private company that had plans really of investing in other companies and helping to build the IP and then, co-venturing together. And in 2018, we got our first investment from that company, which is based in Colorado. Over time, they continue to invest. We have 6 patents, which can be costly. That's one way of putting it. And I've worked with JMB in the interest of full disclosure. I was also working with a patent examiner, a former patent examiner who's a patent agent in the United States, who was with various firms during that tenure.
So you had mentioned IP, and also looking at your website, you could tell that you are very IP focused and you showcase your patents and their numbers.
That's in the interest of full disclosure as well.
So just taking a step back, what role does IP play in your business strategy?
If I had to put it into specific terms, which is always challenging for me, just so you know, is when you have an idea or you're planning a company or you've got a product idea in mind, and there is a distinction there. What I had found was something really interesting about images, about image scenes, about image properties that could be applied to both non-medical and medical images, to any image. Had I been in an academic institution, that's where we would have, continued and done academic research probably for the next 20 odd years. That wasn't the case. So I think from a company standpoint, investors like to have proprietary product that you're working with or proprietary ideas. And that's where IP can come in that respect. I think if I had to do a retrospective on this, we were very IP focused, and it had nothing to do with, trying to protect intellectual property. It had to do with, there's some really interesting and cool things here. Let's get it down on paper. Let's see if we can bring this to bear, but let's flesh this out in its entirety. Mm-hmm. And so within this perspective is we start with photographic images that are composited together in understanding then the principles and the attributes in those images that confer this figure and ground dynamic and all these other gestalt visual cues, and then how they can be applied both in terms of image analysis and image processing, but also in terms of cognitive health. And there's a whole nother aspect that goes to cybersecurity as well, using images and the ability for you as an individual to identify yourself as a human, number one, and also to validate yourself that you are the user for this particular, application or whatever you're going into. Wow. So it was very broad ranging in that respect, and at times very overwhelming, I have to be honest with you. So, and very exciting and interesting and fascinating.
Now, you had mentioned your move to Israel, or aliyah, as you put it, which is a Hebrew word for moving to Israel. And it seems that Israel plays a big role on the development of you professionally and also your company. Can you just elaborate on what's interesting and unique about a startup in Israel and being here?
It's a great question, I think. I'm still in Ola Chadasha, at least for another year.
So for our listeners, that means a new immigrant. Right?
Thank you. Yes. And so, to be perfectly honest, I think, as a new Ola, that's number one, an issue in terms of adjusting over time from a cultural standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, and just getting settled as well. The language is certainly a component. Israel has this wonderful ability to begin a conversation in English and then switch over to Hebrew. Mm-hmm. That can be challenging. I will say this, though. It's from an ecosystem standpoint, there's so many opportunities to tap into. And I think it's up to the individual to do that. And I didn't always do that. We're a small company, and so I was always very actively involved in all aspects of it. And at times, the marketing and outreach component probably fell by the wayside. But those opportunities exist here. And that I think is really the beauty of Israel. And as I said, much of this really began not only with my desire to make Aliyah, but with taking pictures in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good answer. And I think that people realize that coming to a new culture, new environment is never going to be easy. And you somehow managed to move forward despite those hurdles.
Some of the time. No, as I said, I was really very fortunate, to have 3 taruchot very early on. And I've worked even before I set up the company. And while I was setting up the company, I always worked. Mm-hmm. It takes time to be out there, to speak with people.
Right.
And that's always a challenge when you're starting out. Like, how much can you talk about? I was also somewhat encumbered, just so you know, with the patents, like how much I could really say before the patents were issued. All of our patents, the 6 of them, were really issued at the start of COVID and were done by the end of COVID. We have one more that's still pending right now. But prior to that time of 2020, there were challenges in being able to discuss things in a cogent way.
Right.
And tell the story. As you know, the story is not as simple, which is why I brought you a picture.
Well, yeah, that's very helpful. I hope that our listeners will understand without seeing the picture, but...
They can always go to the website, or we can provide a link and sure, folks can look at it there.
That sounds like a good idea.
Great.
What sort of tips do you have for founders that are just starting out with a new idea or with a new company?
Know your strengths and weaknesses. That's number one. And to surround yourself with people who complement that and who challenge you and are not just yes people. I think that that's a challenge for a lot of CEOs is to build that team that makes it work. And I would say the other thing is to believe in what you're doing more than anything else. I had the experience very early on that to get that second opinion is like, well, am I really doing this? And is this a really good patent? And, does this have, the prospects of the future that I believe that it has from a product standpoint? And I went to a very well-known patent attorney and I showed it to him. Within 10 seconds, he's like ripping off the pages going, nah, there's nothing much here. And I'm like, 10 seconds, 6 years of my life. It's an interesting balance. So I think it's important to believe in yourself. And so after that, I still believed in myself and got a third opinion and just proceeded. And so 6 patents later, with the 7th in the offing, I think we did okay.
Mm-hmm. Glad to hear that you found the right patent attorney.
Absolutely.
And the right second or third opinion, whatever it was.
It is a process, though. You have to be willing to stay the course and surround yourself with people that can help you and also give yourself time to decompress. Mm-hmm. So for me, photography became that decompress mode. When I needed to think something through or plan something through, 6 patents is not an easy thing to run through. Mm-hmm. And I did all of the provisionals on them and much of the writing on it, as well as the graphics. So it is a process. So you need to, keep your head above water and know how to keep your head above water.
It's interesting what you said about decompression, because I think that's an important aspect that's sometimes overlooked. And you're probably the first person to give this answer after around 30 or so episodes of this podcast.
Really?
So, yeah. But I'm a big fan as well. Make sure you have interests and make sure you can take your mind off of your work.
Absolutely.
That's
and
not
to make time for yourself. Just as a side note, I actually had the domain name decompress.com. However, it was in the early 2000s and nobody was talking about decompressing. Nobody talked about work pressures or the challenge of work-life balance or to find that balance in life, period. So, yeah, I gave up that domain though.
Interesting. Okay, where do you see your company, Conflu3nce, in a year or further down the road?
Well, one of the things that's a priority on our agenda is to complete the patents. We have one that's still outstanding. It's the 7th, which specifically deals with medical images. And we also have the European and Indian patents on the cybersecurity patent that we have. So that's a priority certainly for the next year or year and a half, depending upon when they come up. We're actually already into our maintenance fees on the very first and second patents, which is really exciting. So we've already brokered that gap to being official patentees. I think in many ways we're looking for the right partners in how we move forward, whether that's with investments or licensing or whatever comes along.
If you look at our episodes, a lot of our founders are male founders and you're a female founder. So can you address unique challenges that you've had as a woman moving forward here in Israel in the startup scene?
That's a great question, by the way. I'm not just a woman or female founder. I'm also an older female founder. So there's different challenges, obviously, whether you're a man or a woman, young or old, new ola from the United States or any other country, or resident if you've been to school here all your life or in the Army service. But the ecosystem is so rich that if you can find your slot and put yourself out there, you can find all the resources that you need, the people that you need, and the environment that helps you move forward during those difficult times and to celebrate really your achievements as well. So I'm very grateful. And I can say I didn't always do that. And I was always very much mired in the R&D aspect of it and didn't always attend the seminar or the webinar or whatever it might be. But it's there for the taking. And you just have to find the right slot that fits.
Okay, that's really good input. And this has been a learning experience for me. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming and being interviewed on Israel Technology Founders Speak.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And I'm happy to put up a link, by the way, so that if anybody wants to take a look at these composited images, it'll be available as well.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
That was Tami Ellison, the CEO and founder of Conflu3nce. We hope you enjoyed this episode. There are many more to come. Do you have a great innovation or startup idea? We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us by going to our website, jmbdavis.com. And if you go to jmbdavis.com/startup, you'll see we have a special site specifically made for startups to help startups protect their innovations. Please be in touch with us and find out how we can help you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode.